The smell of old coffee and forgotten dreams still clung to me, a phantom scent from years spent hustling. But today, the crisp, clean Texas air filled my lungs, carrying the faint, sweet perfume of success. My name is Elara Vance. And at 33, I'm the CEO of a thriving energy solutions company right here in Austin. People see the confident woman in tailored suits, the one leading board meetings and gracing industry magazine covers. What they don't see are the jagged edges of my past, the story that began in the sun-drenched innocence of childhood and then plunged into a darkness where I learned that sometimes the ones who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you most. I was barely 3 when the Harpers adopted me from an orphanage on the outskirts of Dallas. I have no memory of a life before them, just the fuzzy warmth of Ellen Harper's gentle smile and Robert Harper's stern but present hand. Their charming Fort Worth house, with its white picket fence and daisy-filled garden, became my world. Ellen, my adoptive mother, had eyes like spring sunlight and a voice that hummed lullabies. Robert, my adoptive father, a banker, was tall and quiet, but he'd always carve out time to toss a basketball with me after work. They were mom and dad, and in the innocent heart of a child, I believed their love for me was boundless, just like a real daughter. My early years were a soft watercolor painting. I remember Sunday mornings, the kitchen filled with the aroma of Mom's buttery cookies, Dad patiently teaching me to tie my shoelaces. The backyard was my kingdom, especially the wooden swing Dad had built himself. "Elara, you'll soar like an eagle," he'd laugh, pushing me higher and higher while Mom waved from the porch. In those moments, I was the happiest kid in the world, bathed in love, care, and an unwavering sense of belonging. Then, the colors bled. I was 6 when my mother gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, Thomas and Lillian. I stood outside the hospital room, clutching a yellow balloon Dad had bought me, vibrating with excitement. I was going to be a big sister. I imagined teaching them to kick a soccer ball, showing them how to draw clumsy, happy cats. But when Mom brought Thomas and Lillian home, her eyes no longer held that familiar warmth when they landed on me. The soft smile that had been mine alone was now reserved only for the 2 fragile bundles in their cribs. Dad was the same, perpetually busy with the new arrivals, and our basketball games became a distant echo. I started to feel like a ghost, a silent observer in the home I once called my sanctuary. At first, I rationalized it. They had 2 new babies. Of course, they were busy. I tried to help, mopping floors, folding tiny clothes, even attempting to hum lullabies to the twins when Mom looked exhausted. But every effort to connect, every tentative step closer, was met with cold glances or words as sharp as glass. Once, when I tried to show Thomas how to hold a spoon, Mom snatched it away. "Elara, leave your brother alone. You don't need to do these things." Her voice was glacial, as if I were a stranger, an intruder. I stood there, hands trembling, utterly bewildered by what I had done wrong. In the years that followed, the unfairness became a gaping wound. Thomas and Lillian received new clothes, shiny new toys, while I wore hand-me-downs with perpetually frayed cuffs. When I dared to ask Dad if he could take me to the movies with friends, he snapped, "You need to be sensible, Elara. We don't have money to waste on frivolous things." Yet, the very next week, I saw him laughing, utterly joyous, as he took Thomas and Lillian to a theme park, a place I had only ever dreamed of. Was I truly part of this family? The question began to gnaw at me. The breaking point arrived one evening when I was 9. Thomas, a boisterous 3-year-old, mischievously shattered Mom's favorite ceramic vase. I tried to stop him, but Mom walked in, saw the glittering shards on the floor, and her eyes, filled with a fury I'd never seen directed at me, locked on my face. "Elara, what are you doing to your brother?" she shrieked, her face crimson with rage. I tried to stammer out an explanation, but she cut me off, her voice dripping with venom. "You're just adopted, Elara. Don't think you have the right to discipline them." Those words pierced my heart like a poisoned dagger. I stood frozen, tears burning behind my eyes, but I clenched my jaw, spun around, and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. That night, I hugged my pillow, my sobs silent, feeling a profound, crushing loneliness for the very first time. I was no longer their daughter. I was just adopted. From that day on, I retreated into myself. I spoke less, smiled less, and actively avoided family dinners. I found solace in the dusty old books at the school library, losing myself in other worlds where no one called me just adopted. Yet, despite the raw pain, a small part of me remained stubbornly grateful to my adoptive parents. They had given me a roof, food, and clothes. I clung to the desperate hope that one day, I would succeed, I would repay them, and maybe, just maybe, they would finally look at me like a true daughter. The rest of my childhood was a silent, desperate struggle to hold on to a shred of self-respect. I excelled in school, always at the top of my class, but not once did I receive a word of praise from my parents. Meanwhile, Thomas and Lillian only had to scribble a childish drawing to be showered with hugs, their artwork proudly displayed on the refrigerator. Once, I won first place in a regional science competition. I brought home the gleaming trophy, my heart pounding with nervous anticipation. Mom glanced at it, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, then simply said, "That's nice, Elara. Now, go do your homework." But when Lillian won a silly game at the park, Mom hugged her, beaming, "My girl is so talented." I stood there, trophy clutched in my trembling hands, feeling utterly invisible. I began to question everything. Had I done something wrong? Was I simply not good enough? Was it because I wasn't their biological child that their love for me was finite, capped by an invisible barrier? Or was there some other reason, a dark secret I didn't know? The pain and loneliness became a constant companion, gnawing at my fragile soul. When I turned 18, a painful realization solidified within me. It wasn't that I was wrong, or unworthy. It was simply that they had chosen not to love me. That truth hurt more than any sharp word, but it also ignited a cold, steady fire deep within me. I decided then and there that even if they didn't see me as their daughter, I would live well. I would succeed. Not to prove anything to them, but to prove it to myself. The day I packed my single suitcase and left that house in Fort Worth, I didn't shed a tear. I simply looked in the cracked mirror one last time and told myself, "Elara, this is your chance. Don't look back." And I walked away, carrying the deep scars of my childhood, but also a fierce, undeniable spark of hope that one day, I would find a place where I truly belonged. I was accepted into the University of Texas at Austin with a partial scholarship, enough to cover tuition, but nothing for living expenses. My adoptive parents didn't offer a single dime. On the day I left, Dad merely nodded and said, "Good luck." Mom was busy in the kitchen, fussing over Thomas and Lillian. I stood at the gate, looking back at them one last time, hoping for a hug, a word of encouragement, anything. There was nothing. It was as if I had never truly existed within those walls. I turned away, dragging my worn-out suitcase, and boarded a bus to Austin, ready to start from scratch. Austin in 2010 was a vibrant, sprawling city, bursting with opportunities but also fiercely unforgiving to those with nothing. I rented a tiny room in a crumbling old building on the east side of town. The walls were cracked, the air heavy with the scent of mildew. My bed was an old mattress on the floor, and my desk, a wooden crate I'd salvaged from an alley. I couldn't afford new textbooks, so I relied on the university library or begged hand-me-downs from upperclassmen. But I didn't complain. I knew I had no right to. If I wanted to change my fate, I had to work twice, 3 times harder than anyone else. To make ends meet, I took any job I could find. During the day, I attended classes. At night and on weekends, I worked as a server at a busy cafe near campus. Shifts stretched past midnight, my feet aching, the smell of stale coffee clinging to my hair. Some days, difficult customers would yell at me for bringing a latte instead of a cappuccino. I'd just bow my head, apologize, and keep serving, because every single tip was a meal for tomorrow. On top of that, I delivered pizzas on weekends, pedaling through the scorching Texas 40°C heat, my shirt perpetually soaked with sweat. I'd drop off pizzas at meticulously kept houses where children's laughter spilled from the manicured lawns. Seeing them, I couldn't help but think of Thomas and Lillian, of the days I dreamed of being loved like that. But I quickly pushed those thoughts away. The past was something I couldn't change, but the future? That was firmly in my hands. College life was a relentless uphill battle. I studied software engineering, a field that demanded intense focus and creative problem-solving. But I was often bone-weary from overwork. Some nights, I'd sit in front of an old borrowed computer, trying to finish complex coding assignments, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. I remember once, during a group project, I actually passed out at the keyboard, only waking up when a friend, a cheerful young man named Matteo, gently shook my shoulder. "Elara, you okay? You look like you're about to collapse," he asked, concern etched on his face. I just smiled, a tired, practiced smile, and said, "I'm fine, just a bit tired." But the truth was, I wasn't fine. I was fighting every single day to avoid being crushed by debt, hunger, and an aching loneliness. Student loan debt was my heaviest burden. Despite the scholarship, I had to borrow more and more each month to cover rent and food. I spent as little as possible, often existing on instant noodles or dry peanut butter sandwiches. Once, I looked in my wallet and saw just $3. The electric bill was due the next day. I sat in my dark, rented room, wondering if I was on the wrong path, if all this struggle was futile. But then, I remembered my childhood, the sharp, cutting words. "You're just adopted." No. I couldn't give up. If I fell, I'd prove them right, prove I was worthless. I wiped my tears, stood up, and kept working. Despite the crushing hardships, I never once asked my adoptive parents for help. I had their phone number, but I never called. Part of me knew they wouldn't care. The other part, the fierce, independent part, desperately wanted to stand on my own 2 feet. I told myself that even if the world turned its back on me, I would live well. Not to make them regret, but to avoid regretting myself. Yet, sometimes in the long, silent nights, lying on that old mattress, I couldn't stop thinking about them. I wondered how Thomas and Lillian were, if my parents ever mentioned my name. Once, I opened an old, faded family photo, taken when I was 5, standing between Mom and Dad, smiling brightly. Looking at it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. But I didn't cry. I folded the photo, put it back in the drawer, and told myself, "Elara, you don't need them anymore." Slowly, agonizingly, I found light in the darkness. At school, I made a few good friends who knew nothing of my past but treated me as an equal. Matteo, that cheerful guy from my group project, often shared his food when he saw me eating just plain bread. "You're skinny as a stick, Elara. Eat this taco," he'd say, shoving a hot, fragrant taco into my hand, refusing to take no for an answer. Small moments like that, however insignificant they might seem, made me feel a little less alone. I also found a deep, consuming passion in software engineering. The dry, logical lines of code gave me a sense of control in a world that often felt chaotic and unfair. In the world of programming, no one cared if I was adopted or orphaned. If my code worked, I had value. I started joining group projects and coding competitions, gradually catching the attention of my professors. Once Matteo and I worked on a project about optimizing energy for smart buildings, a relatively novel idea at the time. Our project won second place in a statewide competition, and for the first time, I felt a surge of genuine pride, a belief that I could truly achieve something great. But life wasn't all bright. In my junior year, I got a call from an old friend from Fort Worth. "Elara, I just saw Thomas and Lillian at the mall with your parents. They looked so happy. You should call them, it's been a while." Those words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I smiled and thanked my friend, but after hanging up, I sat frozen, feeling as if the world had collapsed around me again. They were still living well, still happy, as if I had never existed. I wondered if they ever thought of me, even once. But then, I shook my head, stood up, and kept coding. I couldn't let the past drag me down. Never. Graduation was a major milestone, but it also brought a harsh dose of reality. I graduated with honors, but the job market was brutal due to an economic downturn. I applied to hundreds of places, from tiny startups to massive corporations, but received only polite, impersonal rejections. My student debt loomed larger, forcing me to move to an even cheaper apartment where my neighbors' arguments pierced the thin walls every night. I kept working as a server and delivery driver, but the money barely covered my debt, let alone building any kind of future. Once, delivering pizza in a torrential rainstorm, I slipped and dropped the entire box. My boss docked my pay, and the customer yelled in my face. I stood there in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone, staring at the ruined pizza on the sidewalk. I wondered if all this relentless effort was truly worth it. But then, I remembered the cold, unwavering fire that had burned in me since leaving home. I picked myself up, returned to my miserable rented room, and kept trying. Opportunity came knocking one fateful afternoon when I stumbled upon an article about the booming green tech industry in Austin. Startups in renewable energy and AI for environmental applications were attracting heavy investment. I immediately recalled the energy optimization project Matteo and I had done in school, and an idea sparked within me. I decided to take the plunge, fully aware the path ahead was fraught with risks. With the little savings I had, and Matteo's unwavering support, I began building a small startup. We worked day and night, pouring every ounce of our being into developing software that helped smart buildings save energy. Matteo and I worked in my cramped rented room, where our desk was nothing more than a wooden plank propped up on an old beer crate. My college-era laptop, barely functional, often froze while trying to run complex algorithms. Matteo brought an ancient desktop computer, but it wasn't much better. We shared packets of instant noodles and cheap, lukewarm coffee, working ourselves to the brink of exhaustion. Some nights, I simply fell asleep at the keyboard, only waking when the harsh morning light streamed through the cracked window. Our core idea was to develop software that used artificial intelligence to optimize energy consumption for smart buildings. But turning that ambitious idea into a tangible reality required money. Matteo and I decided to enter a startup competition in Austin, where founders pitched their ideas to potential investors. The first prize was $50,000, enough to buy better equipment and finally rent a small office. We spent 2 grueling months preparing, working 18-hour days to perfect our prototype and hone our pitch. I coded until my fingers went numb, while Matteo meticulously handled the interface design and market research. The night before the competition, I looked in the mirror and saw a gaunt woman with dark circles under her eyes, but they still burned with fierce determination. "You've got this, Elara," I told myself. "You have to." On the competition day, I stood in a packed auditorium, facing dozens of investors and rival teams. My hands trembled as I held the microphone, but I took a deep, steadying breath and began. I explained our idea, how it could save millions for commercial buildings and cut tons of carbon emissions yearly. I even briefly shared my journey, an orphan kid who grew up facing endless hardship but never, ever gave up. I didn't know if my personal story resonated, but when I finished, the room erupted in applause. Matteo and I locked eyes, our hearts pounding in unison. We won second place, taking home $25,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make me feel an undeniable surge of conviction. I was truly on the right path. With that money, we rented a small corner in a shared workspace in downtown Austin. Our office was just a wooden table, a few old chairs, and a whiteboard covered in scribbled notes. But to me, it was everything. I finally felt I had a place to belong, a tangible goal to strive for. We founded our company, naming it Green Path Solutions. The name was Matteo's idea, inspired by syncing technology with a sustainable future. I wasn't good with names, so I just laughed and agreed. In 2018, a real opportunity presented itself. We were invited to speak at a major green tech conference in San Francisco, an event that drew startups and big investors from across the nation. Matteo and I could barely afford the plane tickets, but we gritted our teeth and spent the money, knowing this could be our last, best shot. At the conference, we pitched to a group of investors from a venture capital firm called Evergreen Ventures. They were incredibly impressed by how our software used AI to predict and adjust energy usage in real time. After the pitch, a middle-aged woman with striking silver hair, Vivian Shaw, the fund's formidable director, invited us to dinner to discuss further. That dinner was the first time in my professional life I felt truly heard. Vivian wasn't just interested in the product. She asked about my story. I told her about my journey, not to win sympathy, but because I wanted her to understand that I wasn't in this just for money. I wanted to create something meaningful, something that could genuinely make the world better. Vivian nodded, her eyes full of an unexpected empathy. At the end of the dinner, she said, "Elara, I believe in you. Not just because of the product, but because I see someone who simply refuses to give up." A week later, Evergreen Ventures agreed to invest $1 million in Green Path Solutions for a 20% stake. That money changed everything. We moved into a real office, hired 3 brilliant engineers and a marketing specialist. I began learning the intricate ropes of running a company, from managing finances to building a cohesive team. In 2020, Green Path Solutions launched its first product. We signed a contract with a prominent hotel chain in Austin, cutting their energy costs by 30% in just 3 months. Word spread like wildfire, and more contracts followed. Office buildings, shopping centers, even a major university in California wanted our software. Revenue soared, and 2 years after the initial investment, the company was valued at a staggering $10 million. I, a girl who once delivered pizzas in the pouring rain, was now the CEO of a respected green tech startup. Forbes even mentioned me in an article about notable entrepreneurs under 30. Reading it, I allowed myself a small, wry smile. They had no idea what I'd been through to get here. Success brought a life I never dared to dream of. I moved out of that moldy rented room into a small but bright apartment in downtown Austin. I bought a reliable, used car, no longer having to bike through the brutal Texas heat. I sent money to Mateo so he could buy a house for his mother in Mexico, a silent thank you for standing by me through the toughest days. But even with money, I never forgot where I came from. I still ate instant noodles when I was busy, wore old t-shirts to work sometimes, and kept that faded adoptive family photo in my drawer. Not because I missed them, but as a stark reminder of how far I'd come. Though my life had transformed beyond recognition, I still carried an emptiness inside. I hadn't contacted my adoptive parents, Robert and Ellen Harper, since leaving Fort Worth 11 years ago. In quiet moments, I sometimes wondered how they were doing. Despite the profound heartbreak their treatment had caused, I remained, strangely, grateful to them. They may not have loved me as their own, but I couldn't deny they had taken me in, giving me a home, however flawed, when I was a vulnerable orphan child. I told myself that one day I would repay them. Not to beg for affection, but to prove I had lived well, that I hadn't let the past define me. The idea of a grand gesture of gratitude, of undeniable success, began to take shape. I thought of a grand beachfront villa, a perfect gift for Dad's 65th birthday, a milestone worth celebrating. In 2023, I sold a portion of my company shares during a second funding round, securing a substantial sum. With that money, I quietly began searching for the right property. I finally found it, a stunning villa in Galveston, a few hours' drive from Austin. It sat right by the ocean, with enormous glass windows overlooking the rolling waves, a lush green garden, and a spacious porch where the constant murmur of the sea could be heard. The villa cost $4 million, a significant amount, even for me, but I knew it would be worth it. I pictured Dad sitting on that porch, sipping coffee, gazing out at the vast ocean. I imagined Mom planting flowers in the garden, just as she used to do in Fort Worth. And maybe, just maybe, they would invite me to stay for dinner, looking at me not as the adopted girl, but as a true daughter. This gift, I desperately hoped, would bridge the years of silence and distance. I worked closely with a lawyer to prepare the intricate paperwork. The gift deed, officially transferring the property to Robert Harper, was signed and notarized. I kept it a complete secret, not telling anyone, not even Mateo. I wanted it to be a surprise, a moment that could potentially change everything. I counted down the days to Dad's birthday, January 4th. I knew I wouldn't be invited to the party, but I decided I would show up anyway, bearing the deed and a heart full of a last, fervent wish. I didn't expect hugs or apologies. I only hoped that by seeing my success, they would finally see me as someone they could be proud of. In the days leading up to it, I couldn't stop thinking about the past. Some nights, I pulled that old family photo from the drawer, staring at the 5-year-old girl beaming innocently between her parents. I wondered if they remembered those days, when they held me close, when they sang me to sleep. I didn't know the answer, but I chose to believe that deep down, they still held some affection for me. This gift, I thought, would awaken it. Dad's 65th birthday arrived. I drove from Austin, my heart pounding like a child awaiting Christmas presents. The gift deed rested in a crisp white envelope, carefully placed on the passenger seat. I wore a simple, elegant suit, feeling the need to look polished, successful, for the first time in years for them. On the drive, I rehearsed my greeting in my head. "Happy birthday, Dad. I have a special gift." I imagined Dad's stunned surprise, Mom's softening smile, and maybe, just maybe, they would see me as a true daughter, no longer the forgotten, adopted kid. The 3-hour drive from Austin to Fort Worth gave me far too much time to think. I recalled my childhood in that house. Sunday mornings filled with the scent of Mom's butter cookies, Dad pushing me on the swing, laughing, "Elara, you'll soar like an eagle." But then Thomas and Lillian were born, and everything crumbled. I became a shadow, sidelined in my own family. Mom's words when I was 8, "You're just adopted," still echoed in my head, sharp as a knife. Yet, even with all the pain, I remained grateful that they had taken in an orphan child, and I wanted to repay them with this gift, hoping it would erase the years of distance, heal the deep wounds. I arrived at the old house in Fort Worth in the late afternoon. The white picket fence still stood, Mom's daisy garden meticulously tended. Music and laughter spilled from the backyard, where the party was in full swing. I took a deep breath, clutching the envelope, and walked through the gate. My heart raced, tinged with a familiar fear. I wasn't invited. No one knew I was coming. But I told myself, "You've come this far, Elara. Don't stop now." The backyard was packed, over 50 guests, friends and relatives, colleagues of my parents, gathered around white-clothed tables. A small band played cheerful tunes, and the rich aroma of grilled meat filled the air. I stood at the edge, trying to blend in, but the moment I stepped forward, I felt eyes on me. Thomas and Lillian, now 27, spotted me almost instantly near the food table. Thomas, tall with blonde hair, wearing an expensive designer shirt, smirked when he saw me. Lillian, her long hair tied high in a bright red dress, giggled behind her hand, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Well, well, look who's here," Thomas called out loudly, his voice dripping with sarcasm, drawing attention from those nearby. "Elara. Long time no see. Still remember the way home?" "Heh, she's wearing a suit," Lillian chimed in, her voice shrill. "Don't tell me you're here to beg for a job at Dad's bank." They burst into laughter, as if I were a living joke. My face burned, but I forced myself to stand tall, gripping the envelope. "I'm here to wish Dad a happy birthday," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And I have a special gift for him." Thomas raised an eyebrow, stepping closer, his wine glass sloshing. "A special gift, really? Let's see, a cheap tie? Or a self-drawn picture, perhaps?" He sneered, eyeing me up and down. Lillian, standing behind him, added, "Hold on, Elara. Dad's got a special gift for you today too. Bet you'll cry when you find out." They exchanged knowing glances, giggling as if they held a secret I wasn't privy to. "What gift?" I asked, my voice laced with an uneasy, premonitory feeling. Thomas shrugged, his smile smug. "Just wait. Dad will announce it soon. Trust me, you'll want to see it before doing anything stupid." Their words made me pause. A gift from Dad after 11 years of silence? Could he possibly be trying to make amends? I didn't dare hope, but a tiny part of me, the little girl who once craved their love, wanted to believe. "I'll wait," I said, my voice low but firm. Thomas and Lillian laughed loudly, as if I'd said something utterly hilarious. "Good call, Elara. Don't go anywhere," Lillian said, then pulled Thomas back to their group of friends, leaving me alone in the sea of people. I scanned the crowd, searching for my parents. I spotted them near the main table. Dad, in a sharp grey suit. Mom, Ellen, in an elegant floral dress. As I approached, they looked up, and I saw shock, raw and undeniable, in their eyes. Dad froze, his wine glass halting mid-air. "Elara," he uttered, his voice stunned, as if seeing a ghost from the past. Mom raised a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with a flicker of panic. What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling, as if my very presence was an unwelcome intrusion. I smiled, though my heart tightened painfully. "I'm here to wish Dad a happy birthday," I said, holding up the envelope. "And I have a special gift." Dad glanced at the envelope, then at me, his eyes a mix of surprise and discomfort. Mom turned away, actively avoiding my gaze, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Thank you, Elara. Later." "Okay," Dad said, his voice flat, dismissive. Then he smoothly resumed chatting with the man beside him. I stood there, feeling like an utter outsider, but I didn't leave. I wanted to give them the gift, to show them who I'd become. And I wanted to know what special gift Thomas and Lillian had so maliciously hinted at. The party went on, but I remained sidelined. No one offered me a seat, no one asked how I was, or what I was doing. I stood near the fence, watching people eat and laugh, as if I were an invisible, forgotten ghost. Thomas and Lillian occasionally glanced at me, whispering and giggling. I tried to ignore them, but each smirk felt like a small, sharp stab. I told myself to be patient, that the moment I gave the gift, everything would change. I imagined Dad opening the envelope, reading the gift deed, and finally realizing how hard I had worked to honor them. But deep down, a voice, a cynical, weary voice, warned, "Elara, you're hoping for too much." Then, the pivotal moment arrived. Dad stepped onto a small platform in the yard, tapping his glass to draw attention. The crowd fell silent, all eyes on him. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his warm voice carrying through the festive air. "Today isn't just my 65th birthday. It's also a chance to share an important decision with all of you." He pulled a document from his pocket, holding it up for all to see. "This is my will." A murmur rippled through the crowd. My heart began to pound with a sickening dread. "I want everyone here to know," he continued, his voice clear and resonant, "that all my assets, this house, my bank accounts, my investments, everything, will be divided equally between Thomas and Lillian, my beloved children." He paused, a deliberate, cruel pause. And then, his words turned sharp, aimed directly at me, a venomous dart launched across the crowded yard. "By the way, Elara, my adopted daughter, is here today after over a decade of absence. She says she has a birthday gift for me, but I think she's here to curry favor. Too bad. She's too late. My will is already set." He looked directly at me, his eyes cold and hard, a chilling smile playing on his lips. "Sorry, Elara. Since you're adopted, I simply forgot to include your name in the will." The yard erupted in laughter and applause. Thomas and Lillian hugged each other, beaming with undisguised triumph. I stood frozen, the ground seeming to collapse beneath me. Was this the special gift they meant? A will that publicly erased me from the family, announced before dozens of strangers and distant relatives. I looked at Thomas, who turned to me with a malicious grin. "Told you, Elara. Dad had a gift for you. And I said she'd cry. Look at her face." Lillian piped up, her voice shrill with glee. They laughed loudly, a mocking, triumphant sound, as if my pain were the most hilarious joke they'd ever heard. Some guests glanced at me, their eyes a mix of curiosity and pity, but no one spoke up. I looked at Dad, desperately hoping he'd say it was a prank, a dark joke to liven the mood. But no. He simply stepped off the platform and resumed the party, as if I didn't exist, as if his words hadn't just torn my soul to shreds. Mom stood there, silent, hands clasped, her face utterly expressionless. My heart shattered. All the years of hard work, the sleepless nights, the desperate, foolish hopes for a family, for acceptance, gone in this single brutal moment. I was that 8-year-old girl again, standing in the kitchen, hearing Mom snap, "You're just adopted." Those words, 25 years later, echoed by my adoptive father, once more. Tears welled up, hot and stinging, but I refused to cry. I couldn't. I couldn't let Thomas and Lillian see me break. I couldn't let my parents think they'd won, that they had succeeded in utterly destroying me. Clutching the envelope, my fingers trembling uncontrollably, I took a step forward, standing in the middle of the yard, facing Dad. The crowd, suddenly hushed, fell silent. All eyes were on me. "I came here to repay you," I said, my voice shaking but clear, ringing through the stillness, carrying to every ear. "Not to beg." I held up the gift deed for all to see, a stark white rectangle against my trembling hand. "This is the deed to a beachfront villa in Galveston, worth $4 million. I bought it, intending to gift it to you both. To thank you for raising me." A stunned murmur rippled through the crowd. Dad froze, his eyes widening, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his wine glass, missing it. Mom covered her mouth, her face paling as if she had suddenly realized some terrible, irrevocable mistake. Thomas and Lillian stood dumbfounded, their smug smiles slowly vanishing, replaced by open-mouthed shock. I continued, my voice now steadier, fueled by a cold, righteous fury. "I've worked my whole life, not to prove anything to anyone, but to prove it to myself. I thought this gift would bridge the gap, make you finally see me as a daughter." I locked eyes with Dad, holding his gaze as his face slowly, sickeningly, crumpled into something that looked like regret. "But now," I said, my voice gaining strength, each word a hammer blow, "I see it's not necessary." Then, slowly, deliberately, I tore the gift deed into pieces. The crisp white paper ripped with a sharp, tearing sound, the scraps falling to the manicured lawn like fragments of my broken heart, like the scattered dust of a collapsed dream. The crowd held its breath, utterly silent. Thomas and Lillian gaped, speechless, their faces a mask of horror. Dad took a step forward, his mouth moving, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had just lost everything. I turned and walked out of the yard, not looking back. The music resumed, but the party's festive atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. I heard whispers behind me, "That's Elara, the adopted daughter. How could they treat her like that?" But I didn't care. I walked through the gate, got in my car, and drove back to Austin, leaving that house and my last, foolish hopes for a family behind. On the long drive back, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange, profound sense of relief, as if I had finally shed a crushing burden that had weighed on my shoulders for decades. It was over. The game was done. In the days following the party, I tried to return to my routine. Green Path Solutions, my green tech company, was thriving. We had just signed a major contract with a chain of shopping centers in California, and my team, now over 60 strong, worked tirelessly to improve our energy optimization software. I attended meetings, joked with employees, and gave media interviews with the poise and confidence of a successful CEO. But every night, back in my quiet apartment, I faced the silence. The family photo was gone. I'd thrown it out after the party, a definitive break. But the memories of them still haunted me. I questioned if I'd done the right thing by tearing up the gift deed and walking away. Was there another way to end this story without leaving a fresh, gaping scar? I realized I needed to heal. Not necessarily to forgive my adoptive parents, Robert and Ellen, or Thomas and Lillian, but to forgive myself. The young Elara who had believed she had to try harder, had to be more, to be worthy of love. I sought out a therapist, a compassionate, middle-aged woman named Clara. At our first session, I sat in an armchair, hands clasped tightly, unsure where to begin. "Just say whatever comes to mind," Clara said, her voice warm and inviting. And so I did. I spoke of my abandoned childhood, my years of scraping by, and that devastating birthday party that had shattered my final hopes. I let out emotions that had been bottled up for years, like a river bursting through a dam. Some sessions I cried. Others, I was consumed by anger, punching the therapy pillow on the chair. But with each session, I felt a little lighter, a little freer. Clara helped me see that childhood wounds don't simply vanish just because I'd achieved success or accumulated wealth. You've built a life to be proud of, Elara, she said during one session. But you need to let yourself feel the pain instead of burying it. I started journaling, something I'd never done before. Each night, I sat at my desk, writing down thoughts, raw memories, and dreams of a life unburdened by the past. I wrote about Dad pushing me on the swing, Mom snapping that I was just adopted, and the moment I tore up that gift deed in front of everyone. Writing helped me see clearly, not to blame, but to understand. I couldn't change them, only how I faced myself. A year passed since that birthday party. I didn't contact my adoptive parents or hear from Thomas and Lillian. They had become part of my past, like a closed chapter in a very long book. But life has a way of surprising you. On a chilly March day, I was invited to speak as the keynote speaker at a major sustainable energy conference in Houston. Green Path Solutions was now a recognized leader in green tech, and my speech was expected to inspire young startups. On stage, before over 500 people, I shared my journey, from an orphan child to the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I didn't mention my adoptive parents by name, but I spoke of the profound wounds that had shaped me, and how I had transformed that pain into an unyielding drive. When I finished, the audience gave a roaring standing ovation. I smiled, feeling an immense sense of accomplishment, a deep understanding of how far I had truly come. After the speech, I mingled in the reception area, shaking hands with investors and chatting with eager students. Suddenly, an elderly woman with striking silver hair pulled back in a high bun, wearing a soft green sweater, approached me. Her eyes were gentle, but tinged with a deep, unmistakable emotion. "Elara," she said, her voice warm and familiar. I racked my brain, trying to place her. Then it hit me. She was Aunt Beatrice, Mom's older sister, whom I'd met only a handful of times as a very young child. "Aunt Beatrice?" I blurted, genuinely surprised. She nodded, smiling softly, but her eyes were red-rimmed. "I heard your speech," she said. "I'm so proud of you, Elara. But I need to tell you something. About Robert's birthday night. After you left. We found a quiet corner of the venue. Beatrice took my hand, as if to lend me strength. She said that after I tore up the gift deed and left the party, the mood in the yard had grown incredibly heavy. Everyone was stunned, Elara, she recounted. No one expected you'd achieved so much. A $4 million villa meant as a gift for Robert and Ellen. But what shocked them more was how you left. Not crying, not begging, just your head held high. She said some guests immediately began whispering, openly criticizing my adoptive parents for their abhorrent treatment. A longtime friend of Dad's, a man named George, told him bluntly, "Robert, you've lost an incredible daughter." Thomas and Lillian, Beatrice continued, initially acted unbothered. They laughed, saying you were just showing off. But when some relatives started leaving early, unwilling to witness the pretense, the siblings fell quiet. Beatrice said she saw Lillian sitting alone in a corner, saying nothing, looking unmistakably guilty. Thomas tried to act confident, but he drank too much, like he was desperately trying to forget something. Dad, Robert, didn't speak for the rest of the party. He just sat at the main table, staring at the torn pieces of the gift deed on the ground, his eyes vacant, haunted. Beatrice said that as she left, she saw him slowly, meticulously, pick up each scrap of paper and slip them into his pocket. Hearing Beatrice's account, a wave of complex emotions surged through me. I didn't know what to feel, pain, anger, or just a vast, quiet emptiness. "Do you think they regret it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Beatrice sighed, squeezing my hand gently. "I believe they do, Elara. But they're too proud to admit it. Ellen never mentions you to me, but I know she reads every article about you. Robert, he's aged a lot since that night. I think he knows he was terribly wrong, but he simply doesn't know how to fix it." I sat silently, gazing out the venue's large windows, sunlight streaming through the panes. I wasn't angry at my adoptive parents, Not exactly. I was just profoundly sad. Sad that we could have had a different story, a better one, if they'd simply chosen to love me as their own. But I was also deeply grateful for Beatrice, for her courage in coming forward, for her quiet kindness. "Thank you, Aunt Beatrice," I said, offering her a genuine smile. "I'm okay, really." She hugged me, and for the first time in years, I felt a true, unburdened touch of warmth from someone connected to my adoptive family. After our meeting, I returned to Austin, continuing my journey. I didn't try to contact my adoptive parents or Thomas and Lillian. I didn't need their regret or their apologies. I had found freedom, not by running from the past, but by finally facing it, acknowledging its power, and then releasing it. In the time that followed, alongside my therapy sessions, I found new meaning in helping others. I began engaging in charity work, focusing specifically on supporting orphans and struggling families. I founded a non-profit organization called Bright Path, directly inspired by my own journey, a path to light, despite starting in darkness. The foundation offers scholarships for orphans, funds skill-building classes, and builds community centers in underserved areas. On my first visit to a community center in East Austin, I met a 12-year-old boy named Miguel, skinny, with shy but incredibly bright eyes that lit up when he talked about his dream of becoming an engineer. I sat with him, listening intently as he shared stories about his mother, a single janitor, and how he taught himself coding on an old library computer. I saw myself in Miguel, a child yearning to rise above his circumstances. I awarded him a scholarship on the spot and promised to follow his journey. When Miguel hugged me, whispering a heartfelt, "Thank you, ma'am," I felt a joy no money, no success, could ever buy. Charity work didn't just help others. It healed me. Each time I met an orphan child, each time I saw hope ignite in their eyes, I was reminded that I wasn't alone. I had found my true family, not in Fort Worth, but in the people I helped, in my brilliant Green Path Solutions team, in steadfast friends like Mateo who had been there through my darkest days. I began to slow down, to savor small moments. A peaceful morning jog by the river, the simple pleasure of a hot coffee in my quiet office, a joyful video call with Mateo and his mother in Mexico. I learned to love myself, not through external success or public recognition, but by accepting that I had done my best, and for me that was truly enough. I no longer needed my adoptive parents' attention or validation. That's my life story, a journey from being abandoned in an orphanage, through years of unspoken hurt in my adoptive home, to the brutal struggle for survival, and finally, to the profound freedom I found within myself. I hope my story leaves some resonance with you, perhaps a spark of motivation to help you rise confidently in your own life. And I wish you the courage to face your past, the strength to move through pain, and the faith to believe that light always waits at the end of the road, if only you keep moving forward. If my journey resonated with you, please like this story and subscribe to my channel for more insights into overcoming life's challenges.